first I'd like to just kind of ask you a couple questions about how you got your start. So one thing that I kind of like to ask every guest involved in video production or any sort of creative field is, I find that when I'm watching interviews with directors or cinematographers or editors and they talk about their start or how they got interested in filmmaking, they always say, oh, well, I like to play with my family's camera, or I was always writing stories down, but I saw this one movie or this one show, or there was this one moment where I decided this is exactly what I want to do. So do you have a movie or a moment like that made you take that leap from this is a hobby of mine to this is what I want to do for my life?
Well, it's interestingly enough, it didn't happen. It didn't start with playing with the camera or whatever. I was actually never attracted to the idea of playing with the camera, the movie camera. So interestingly, yeah. Yeah, so the camera that I shot Be My Cat with actually was the first camera I bought, because I thought it would be realistic, because that guy buys a camera just to send this message to Anne Hathaway. It's like the first camera in his life, so I thought it's perfectly okay if I never use a camera in my life, and I will be my first images that I ever shot in my life were with this camera, literally.
That's
like,
really
literally,
cool.
Yeah, that's like really crazy. Yeah. So I did not come from that background, from the fascination with the technical, with the idea of filming. But the movie that literally turned my life in completely in a direction so different from the one that I had before was 2001: A Space Odyssey. Because I think that happened somewhere in adolescence, somewhere during high school probably. Because before that movie, I was a person who was watching movies just the way just the way you go into a restaurant and you hear background music,
Right.
I was not aware of, that I'm watching a piece of art or something like that. And I was not into art that much. I was a lot into physics. I was a lot into science, biology, stuff like that. And
so movies were just kind of more of a recreational thing at that point?
Exactly. I was not aware this is an art, this is something, that you are, special thing that you are experiencing. And at some point I remember I was in front of had a TV and was late, I remember. And I was just changing the channels on the TV, and it was that there was Cartoon Network. This was the period kind of it was still the post-revolutionary period in Romania. Cable TV was still something relatively new, and they gave us some foreign channels, and there was Cartoon Network. But after 10 p.m. at night, they stopped Cartoon Network and they started showing TNT, a movie with classical movies. A channel with classical movies, And I was just changing channels at some point, probably, I don't know, wanting to see something. And all of a sudden, I saw this image from 2001: A Space Odyssey, these scenes. I forgot exactly which scenes were, but I think one of them was that one with the monkey crushing the bones in the beginning. I was like, oh my God. I remember literally the hair going up on my back. And that was literally one of my biggest revelations, to say so, And from that moment on, I started to become extremely interested in film, and the history of film. I started spending all my spare time literally reading about film history during my high school period and stuff like that. So that was the first my big thing that took me away from anything else and brought me closer to film and to art in general. And interestingly, one of my second influential piece, but that's different. That's not something that brought me into filmmaking necessarily, but highly influential was the Blair Witch Project. And I found it very interesting that actually when you contacted me on Facebook and asking to do this interview, at some point you proposed actually, okay, let's talk about 2001 and Blair Witch, because these are exactly the two ones that kind of influenced me the most, and also the two ones that influenced probably the most my upcoming movie, you know. So it was a very interesting coincidence.
Yeah, that is a very interesting coincidence.
Yeah.
I admire both those movies, and I can't wait to hear your thoughts on them later down the road, especially since they were so influential for you. But yeah, that is kind of interesting that both of those films were in our top tens, and kind of like you, my top 10 is very sort of locked down and rigid. Like, it's been the way it is kind of almost as long as I can remember. It takes a lot for a movie to break into my top 10. But
yeah.
So I guess so 2001 was what sort of changed the course of your life in that regard. So what were some of the, so after you have that moment where you see the monkey beating in the skull in the sand and tossing the bone up in the sky, do you go out and watch more Kubrick movies, or did you just kind of start processing everything in a new light, or who are some of your other influences?
Yes. Since I did not have internet or a computer, all I had was cable TV. I started to buy some TV guide, you know, and that one I realized at some point. I realized that there is a good connection between the stars, that they were rating movies with stars from 1 to 5 stars. And they were saying, oh, the 5 stars one is a masterpiece, you know, and 4, 1 very good movie, 3 okay, and 2 so. And somehow I realized that, hey, like all the superficial films that they were showing on TV, that they were not, they didn't have much, you know. They were like rated like 2 stars or at most 3, you know. And then 2001: Space Odyssey or other movies, some were rated 5 stars. And I started to watch the ones that were rated 5 stars and 4 stars. I realized, wow, I really actually have to watch this movie. So then I started to constantly buy that TV guide, and I was like literally waiting, hoping that they would show on TV those films, you know, that they were considered to be masterpieces. And at some point, I wrote to one of the TV guys, and I asked something like, what is their rating system? Where do they get their info? And they wrote back and they said it's from a website called allmovie.com, you know. So then I went to a foundation. There was a foundation in my local city, an organization or whatever, something local, which offered access to computer and internet for free, you know, especially to children, to adolescents and stuff like that. So then I started, whenever I finished my classes in high school, instead of going home, I used to go to that foundation, literally spending hours till night, like literally reading and taking notes about all the great masterpieces that were pointed out by that website. And then I was like waiting, hoping that some of those films would be shown on TV. That was my.
How often would that line up for you?
So I would say. But since this period of my life like lasted long enough, like there were years, somehow I still managed to see enough of them. And where I couldn't, I could just watch some wonderful scenes back then on the internet. You know, I couldn't watch the entire movies or whatever, but I could still watch some essential scenes from some films and read about them, and still that was like enough for me.
Right.
And it's a pity, by the way, it's a pity that now all movies like that website was initially built, All Movie and All Music, in order to provide some sort of encyclopedia that would literally point out to, for example, they were rating movies, the critics on All Movie, they were rating movies not based on their personal opinions, but based on the general opinion in the film industry, you know, from critics, academics, that generally how a film is considered in film history, you know, and that was a very good resource. And unfortunately, lately, that site was bought by another company, and now they started to totally mess up those ratings. It's totally irrelevant today, and
that's a shame. But
exactly.
I see what you mean in that. a lot of the kind of more informed opinions are kind of blocked out by sort of the general audiences. I think just by virtue of the fact that the internet has become so widespread and almost everyone has access to it, and everyone can sort of throw in their own opinion into the discussion on a movie. So it's kind of hard to come across those like really well informed opinions. But I think that it kind of makes those movies all the more special in that way when you can seek them out and find them. It makes it stand out more in your memory than just any other movie that could be playing in theaters or on TV.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a problem, with actually with people voicing their opinions and stuff like that. Yeah, my problem was mainly with that that website, because now they used to have like now that website is like much better replaced, for example, by how do you call Sight and Sound's best movies of all time.
Right, yeah.
But they poll like hundreds or over 1,000 last time, but probably now there will be thousands in 2012. They do that once in 12 years, so practically that's a very good reference point if you want to see what the critics or the filmmakers are thinking, or the people in the film industry think about this art.
Yeah, I definitely agree. So then, I don't remember if I asked this initially, but if you had to name names, who would you say are some of your biggest influences as a director?
Biggest influence as a director, I would start with Stanley Kubrick. But the thing is that my work is extremely different. It's exactly the opposite, because he influenced just because with his vision, him wanting to do this literally this metaphysical thing, this big metaphysical thing that talks about everything there is, this he influenced me, but not necessarily his directing technique, more like his metaphysical ambitions, like he influenced me the same way, in a way that Beethoven influenced me. Do you understand what I mean?
Right.
These big things, like wanting with art to talk about these big mysteries of life. And when I talk about that, I'm referring to 2001: A Space Odyssey. Like, where do we come from? What's the meaning of life? I'm trying to talk about past, present, and future, and everything into one single movie. Practically, that is what really influenced me with Stanley Kubrick. And because what I didn't necessarily like. Or back then I didn't care, but now being more into acting and working with actors after I studied acting and all that, is the fact that he didn't give space for improvisation in his films, or he was extremely strict with actors. Do exactly the way they talk, exactly the way they move, and that sucked the life out of his movies. And that's why that's no coincidence that his best movie is actually 2001: A Space Odyssey, where actors are not important. Because when actors are important in his movies, I don't think they are as good, because he was so much focused on this perfect technical stuff, perfect frame, exactly the way he wants, that he limited the actors' liveliness too much,
Right.
And that would be my. And I realized that actually other directors have said similar stuff. I think, I'm not sure, maybe I'm wrong. Either James Cameron or some other directors said similar stuff about Kubrick, that they were a huge influence on them. But they wouldn't do it. They wouldn't be as strict with actors as he was. They would give more space, because they believe that the liveliness, what happens with the actors, that is the life of a movie. That is the heart of a movie.
Exactly.
The truth, the human truth that they can add to the picture. And because you asked me more directors' names, okay. Another one would be Michael Moore, I think.
Okay.
But Michael Moore, not only politically, with his documentaries, he also influenced me like literally as a method of filmmaking, even with my found footage films. Because I took some things from Blair Witch, but I also took some things from Michael Moore, the way he just goes around with the camera and talks to the camera. I don't know. To me, there is a connection between Michael Moore filmmaking and found footage filmmaking, and definitely influenced me as a director. Other directors. I have a lot of films that influenced me a lot.
Definitely, yeah. But, I mean, just looking at your website, you've narrowed it down to the top 250, it looks like.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I have a lot of films that influenced me a lot, but in terms of directors, I would stop at Kubrick and Michael Moore, because, for example, with the Blair Witch Project, although the film influenced me that much, but I can't say that the directors, because I didn't follow their career, I shortly checked another movie one of them made and some trailers, and I realized, hey, like, there's nothing for me there, and so I can't say that, and this is true for kind of other filmmakers as well. There are films, but not necessarily the directors with their entire career influencing me.
Right, yeah, I think that's kind of the best thing about the film as an art form, is that you can kind of find films or find directors or find cinematographers, editors, whoever that you admire, and you can see what you can find those elements that you really strongly admire and kind of pick and choose. Like, okay, these are some elements that I want to translate into my work, and these are some things that I maybe want to leave out. It is a very kind of collaborative in a weird way process, even if you're talking from the perspective of a well-established director and someone who's never even picked up a camera before. There's kind of this nice trickle down effect.
I'm never the perfect fan actually for anyone actually. The way there are these perfect fans, they just look at a certain piece of art or at a certain artist, and you just love everything they do. I don't think I have anybody that I can look at this way. Like I always, my mind is extremely critical thinking, always challenging the norms. Always challenging the establishment. Always, even if something is considered to be perfect, and even if I find it perfect at some point in my life, later after a year or two, I start to challenge it, I start to challenge myself even. And that's why, for example, I specified even in that list of my top movies, those are actually movies that influenced me in the past, that had an influence on my life, that's why I put them there. But today, if you ask me today, what I think about them, or if they are my top movies today, I wouldn't put them actually in top 10, They are like what made me along the history, but not necessarily who I am right now in this moment and what I think right now. Kind of complicated.
Exactly, yeah. And I again, that's just one of those beauties of films where it's like, the films that form you are kind of like it's ever growing and ever changing and very sort of like malleable. But even if it's a movie that you don't necessarily like nowadays, there's you can look back on it years later and still see the value in it, even if you might not necessarily consider it to be as great as it was. Like for me, for instance, there was an independent movie that I saw back in high school called Red State by a filmmaker named Kevin Smith, and I loved that movie. I loved everything about it. It was made on a small budget. That was the moment for me. That was when I decided, filmmaking is not an impossible venture. I could go out and do that. And looking at that movie nowadays, it's flawed. It has problems, and I don't think it's the big masterpiece that it was, but I do think it's important to recognize the influence it had over me and where a lot of my ideas about filmmaking came from. And I totally agree with you when you say that things are ever changing like that.
Things are changing, and they are not. For example, there are some films that I would say that influenced me the most. There are other films that I would say that they are the best ever made. There are different films that I would say that I like the most, you know, and there, again, there are different things that I would say that I would recommend the most. For example, I would recommend the movie that impressed me the most is 2001: A Space Odyssey. The movie that I think is the best ever made. Complicated. I don't think that one. Maybe the Gold Rush. Charles Chaplin's The Gold Rush. Movie that I would recommend the most, actually, it would be Untold History of the United States, and I would recommend it for the truth being told about the history and about the politics, you know. And also, if you ask me about which is one is actually my favorite film right now, I don't know actually. You know, so there are different categories of so-called favorite films of mine.
It's actually funny you say that, because that was my next question, is what is your favorite movie? But if it is, I guess let's put it like this: do you have a movie somewhere in that 250 where you could be in any kind of mood, like anything could be happening in your life, and you can put it on and just, I guess 2001 would be a good example, but do you have any films? It's not like that?
And unfortunately, I am jealous of filmmakers. When I hear people talk about some people talk about my movie, and I felt like, oh my God, like, it's unbelievable. No, people saying I watched your film like the 4th time or something like that, and other people saying in general about movies, you know, oh my God, I've watched like 10 times this film, and I'm like, I can't watch movies so many times. I don't have a relationship with film. I think the way I don't know, the way I would have with music or something. But even with music, I'm not like that. Yeah, unfortunately, no. As I said, I'm not a good fan in general of things. You know, I think I'm too much questioning. You know, I don't know. I think I find a problem in becoming too much comfortable with the status quo. You know, something that is so much. It's hard to find my words actually about this. It's just complicated. It's a complicated inner thing, you know, that
right.
I feel. But I think I need more time in order to analyze my thoughts and my feelings in order to give an answer of why I feel this way.
No, it definitely makes sense. Yeah, it just goes back to that point earlier of movies just being an ever-changing art form, and the way you feel about a movie one day could be completely different how you feel about it a week later. What's important is how it affects you in that moment, and then the lessons you take from it and carry on to your next project, or even just beyond, if you're a filmmaker, the lessons or the thoughts or the ideas that you take into your life.
Exactly. Yes. And for example, I can tell you lately, there are periods actually where I can feel like watching something, but not, as you said, like regardless of the mood, regardless of how I feel, I want to watch that film. There are periods when I can, for example, when I feel like more metaphysical or always give, but not watching the entire movie, you know. I just go, for example, and lately I was watching the trailer for the Tree of Life, which I consider to be like literally one of the greatest trailers ever made, and so many times it gives me tears, you know, and makes me think about this greater metaphysical stuff, you know, and at the same time with a lot of emotion. Unfortunately, I don't think the movie is great as well, but it's I would say it's more flawed, but the trailer is wonderful on that film, and that same thing applies to Terrence Malick's latest film, A Hidden Life. Same stuff, but yeah, something that I could watch anytime at any moment. No, unfortunately, I don't have.
No, it's completely fine. Again, it's one of those things where it's like, for some people it's just constantly changing and evolving, and it's no better or worse than the people who are like, yep, this has been my favorite movie since I was 3, and I can always find some enjoyment out of it.
Yeah, I see.